Okay, so last time and on all the other episodes, we've really covered the adventures you've been on, the excitement of your life, but maybe for the listeners that wouldn't understand what it is to become a pirate, take us right back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about your childhood.
I was born in Cambridge, and it was November '44, and I was born in a pub called the Gwyder Arms on Gwyder Street, Cambridge. When I was 1 year old, my mother died, so I became a motherless child. And obviously, my auntie, who became effectively my mother, and everyone around me surrounded me with love until I was about 4 years of age. And then a black car arrived with a guy and a woman inside, and I was told this was my father, and he'd come to collect me, and he took me away in 20 minutes. I was gone from this loving relationship with these wonderful people. I was taken to London and introduced to my new family. And after a while, I was introduced to my new brother. And we went to live in a place called South Oxley near Watford. And from that minute, even as a 5-year-old child, my mindset was to escape. I had to escape from this false situation I was in and get back somehow to the love that I had before. So my childhood was built on escapism, and therefore I hardly ever went to school. From the age of 9, 10, 11, 12, I was working. I would go working on selling newspapers, on an ice cream van, caddying in the golf club. And my idea was to get enough money to escape, because escapism 24 hours a day was the only thing that was in my head. Consequently, I missed out on education. I missed out on learning to read and write properly. And so my education was going further and further backwards due to this escapism situation. I remember once being taken to the seaside, Jaywick Sands. I'd never been to the sea before. I didn't even know it existed. And I watched another kid had a boat, a little sailboat, and it was pushed out, and it would always come back. And then all of a sudden, the wind caught it, and off it went. And they were all frantically jumping up and down on the beach. How are we going to get our boat back? And I was sitting there saying to the boat in my mind, go, go, go. I was so happy that everyone was distraught that kid lost his boat, but I was so happy this boat had gone. And that was probably the moment when I realized that's what I've got to do. So at the age of 13, if I jump forward in time, at the age of 13, we moved to Pinner. And it was only 2 or 3 miles from the school, so I would bike to school every morning, or when I did go to school. And to go to school, you would pass through Northwood Woods. And I was passing through there on my bike one rainy morning, and I saw this leaflet on the ground, or a page out of a magazine. I don't know, I can't remember. It was wet, draggled, and there was a picture of a ship, of a young boy smiling. And I picked it up, and it said, "Join the Merchant Navy." And I picked it up, and I took it with me to school, and I wrote a letter to join the Merchant Navy. And as I said in a previous podcast, I was half an inch too short. So I went through a long process of begging the doctor and everyone to lie and say I was 5'6" when I was actually 5'5.5", until eventually they did actually take me into the school. I was so enthusiastic, so willing to learn, so ready to escape, that I became the number one student in the sea school. I was number one boy. They called me number one boy. And I learned everything in that sea school that was absolutely useless for me in later being at sea. They would teach us the compass, which was north by east, northeast by north, and all the points of the compass that today don't even exist. Now it's how many degrees. You sail 90 degrees, but in those days you sailed east. So I learned all the knots, and I learned everything that was connected to the old style seaman. And although it was useless information for when I actually went to sea, it later became important things to know, that I underestimated the information that I had in my mind when I finally branched out to become a pirate. So that basically is what happened to me as a child, and that is why I went to sea.
Thank you for sharing that, Tonz. That's a really powerful story. It's a really powerful imagery about seeing a boat disappear, and that sort of representing how you felt about your life. And I can see how then when you get the post for joining the Merchant Navy, that feels like another sign to allow you, enable you to escape. Hence why you threw yourself into it and became number one boy in the Navy, Merchant Navy, okay? But correct me if I'm wrong, Merchant Navy is a legal enterprise, okay? So how did you go from being the number one boy in a legal enterprise to becoming a pirate?
I had a very bad start in the legal enterprise of the Merchant Navy when I was arrested on my first ship, the English Star, Blue Star Line from London. In Durban, South Africa, I was arrested under the apartheid laws of speaking to black people and thrown into jail. I felt so alone. I felt so alone that my comrades in the ship and the captain and everyone else, I felt had left me, hang me out to dry. I was there. I didn't even know what I'd done wrong. I was very lucky because it was my 16th birthday. And under the apartheid laws of South Africa, 16 and under, if you plead guilty, you will be given 6 lashes of the cat of nine tails, which is a bamboo stick that's cut. So it's got lots of sharp edges so that when it hits you, it sprays open and cuts you. Or if I pleaded guilty, I would go to jail and my case would come up in some 6 months' time. Naturally, I was sitting there with the ship's agent and I pleaded guilty. I was taken outside and I was beaten half to death. I was put on a plane, deported from South Africa, put on a plane to Mozambique to rejoin the ship. When I rejoined the ship, I was hit again because the captain considered me guilty and deducted my entire wages for the entire trip, which had only just started and it was 9 months long, the trip, to pay for the mess he said I had caused. Consequently, when I left the ship after arriving in London, the captain didn't repent. In my report book for my abilities was very good. But for my conduct, it was written DR, which means decline to report, which means no other ship will give you a job because decline to report means you're a troublemaker. I sat in the union office in Silvertown, London, for months, every day, sat there in the hope that I could get on another ship. I was looked after by a priest in the Silvertown Seamen's Mission where I lived in a dormitory, and I never gave up. I just went there every day, and to the point where the union people in the office would give me a bacon sandwich in the morning and a cup of tea for breakfast and kind of look after me. And then one day, this Canadian guy came rushing into the office, went up to the counter, and he said, "I'm off a Swedish ship, and we can't sail because we're missing one crew member, and we need an ordinary seaman." Well, I was deck boy, and that means that I was the guy who washed the plates for the crew. That was the lowest person on any ship, was the deck boy. But the union guy who had taken pity on me looked at me and winked and said, "You're a junior seaman, aren't you?" And he winked again, and I said, "Yes." And the Canadian guy said, "How quick can you leave?" I said, "Immediately." And we went from there in a taxi to the Silvertown Seamen's Mission, collected my 2 or 3 things. And 40 minutes later, I was on board a Swedish ship bound for Sweden.
So, Tonz, just to go back and clarify something, you started off with that story. And so you'd gone to Durban, you'd just spoken to someone in the street because you're friendly. And then because of the apartheid laws, you then got put into prison. And what you're saying is it's the fact that your crew then didn't really look out for you, and then you were still punished even more. That's what almost pushed you away from that life.
Well, it's actually worse than that, because the reason I'd gone ashore was the crew had taken me ashore. And they had made me drink a beer. Well, I've never drank beer before. So I was feeling really weird. I was obviously drunk. I didn't know what drunk meant at the time, but my mind was going all over the place. So I left the crew members in the bar and had to get back to the ship. And I had taken the wrong turning, and I'd walked through what was black people's area where white people were not allowed to go. And I was asking the people, which way is the port? And I couldn't understand it, that they were running away from me and slamming doors in my face. They didn't want to speak to me, and I couldn't understand why. And of course, later I understood there were apartheid laws where white people were not allowed to speak to black people, and consequently I was arrested simply for asking the way to the port. And the cause of this was actually the other crew members of the ship.
So now, let's call it a blessing in disguise then. So as you said,
Yeah.
you weren't allowed on any more legal ships, and then you got into this ship, which at the time you said it was a legal ship in your mind that you were getting onto, wasn't it? When you had the wing.
Oh, it was a purely illegal ship. It was a Swedish tanker, and I joined the Beckton Gasworks on the Thames, and from there we went to through the Kiel Canal to the Baltic, and then to it was under the Soviets at the time, but Klaipėda, which is now Lithuania, and we were running oil and creosote backwards and forwards from Lithuania to Denmark on a purely legal ship. I was just on it because they were missing a crew member at the time.
And so with that, let's call it lack of training to be at that level necessarily to be on that ship, when you mentioned the Kiel Canal, at what point did you start having to do tasks that maybe were a bit above those that you were skilled to be doing?
It started the first night. I was given a watch on small ships. There are 6-hour watches, 12 till 6, 6 till 12. And my watch was 12 till 6, which means at midnight till 6 o'clock in the morning was my first watch. They gave me the ship's wheel and they said 55 in Swedish, which is 55. And I was shouted at by the captain, who said, I have to repeat what I'm told. So I had no idea what 55 meant, but I managed to say it. And the wheelman left me alone on the wheel. And there I was suddenly, from 14 years of coming last, here I am in my dream, holding the ship's wheel by myself on a bridge in the night. And it was a trip. It was a total mind trip. And slowly, without realizing, I was turning the wheel always to the left. I didn't know what I was doing at all. until finally the ship started going in circles, ever smaller circles, until it started to list, and then everybody, what's going on? And the whole crew came bursting into the wheelhouse. And there I am in my dream, smile on my face, how wonderful, watching the stars whiz by out the window. Well, they were whizzing by because the ship was going around in circles. And in this wonderful trip, suddenly I was picked up. My head was slammed onto this big compass. I was thrown to the floor and I was kicked, and I was kicked again, and I was punched. And within a few minutes, I had teeth broken, lips broken, black eyes, blood everywhere, bruises everywhere. And I was then picked up again and put in front of the compass. And the big Sven, the Swedish wheelman, had put the ship back on course, which was 55. And there was 55 in the compass. Can you see 55? Yeah, 55. And by 6 o'clock in the morning, dying, blood everywhere, I had learned every single number on the compass. Not only 55, but every other number on the compass. And I could steer the ship. The thing was, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I went to sleep and I crashed. And then I was woken up 12 o'clock lunchtime from my second watch. And we were already at the Kiel Canal. And the German pilot came on board. And he was very small, had a uniform and a black stick. I'd never wondered what he did with the black stick. But he came on board and said, "Good morning, Captain." And then he turned to me and he looked at me. And then you could see on his face, what am I looking at? I had a tooth sticking through my lip. I had two black eyes. I was a mess. And he said to the captain, "Is this the wheelman that is going to steer the ship through the canal?" And the captain nodded. And he looked at me, this pilot, and he said, "You will steer the ship in the middle of the canal. Not 1 centimeter to the right and not 1 centimeter to the left, in the middle. You understand?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, but I knew today I was going to die. This was my last day of life, because after last night, now I'm going to die." 6 hours later, and still in the canal, near to the end, Big Sven, the other wheelman, came to relieve me. My watch was up, 6 o'clock in the morning. And the pilots turned to the captain and he said, "9, I want this English wheelman to continue all the way to the end of the canal, which is another 2 hours." And there I was, suddenly thinking, I'm not going to die, to, oh my God, I'm going to die again.
Why were you going to die? Why did you think that?
Well, I woke up about 11:30, and about 10 minutes before going to the bridge for the Kiel Canal, I was in the mess with the cook. And I was, the only thing I could do was drink. I couldn't eat because my mouth and everything was broken. And drinking this coffee, and the cook said, "You thought last night was bad. We're now at the Kiel Canal, so today you're going to die." The cook told me that, you make a mistake today, it'll be worse than last night. And the only thing worse than last night was dying. So when I actually went to the bridge to take over the wheel, I already knew that if I couldn't do this, I was going to die. Eventually we arrived at the end of the canal, and the pilot turned to the captain and he said, "Captain, I have been a pilot on this canal 35 years. Never have I seen a wheelman hold the ship in the middle of the canal like this." And he turned to me and clicked his heels and saluted me. And I couldn't understand it, nor could the captain understand it, because only the night before I'd been taking the ship in circles. So that was really a moment where suddenly I realized to myself, hold on, I can do this. I've done it. And then off we went, and every now and then the captain would look at, if we were steering 90, which is normal for a ship going east, he would steer 89, just to make it difficult for me to hold. It's easy to hold the ship on 90, but it's much more difficult to hold it onto 89. And then he would change that to 91, and I would hold it, and he couldn't understand how I was doing this. And slowly, I understood myself that I had an ability. I had never had an ability all my life. I was useless. But suddenly I realized I had an ability. And that ability came to its maximum potential when we hit a hurricane. About a couple of months later, we hit a westerly hurricane. We were going west into the hurricane. And I came up to take the wheel at lunchtime, 12 o'clock. And Big Sven was there fighting the wheel, spinning it to the left, spinning it to the right. It was cold, but he was sweating like a pig, and spinning it again and spinning it again. The ship was going everywhere. And they looked at the captain and the mate were on the bridge with Big Sven, and they looked at me, and they just went, no. And I convinced them I could do this. So I took the wheel. Oh, within a minute, I suppose, the ship calmed down. I didn't have any need to spin the wheel to the right or to the left. Gentle movements, and I had control of the ship, and the ship was calmer, even in the hurricane. And the captain said to Big Sven, okay, you go and take a break, take some coffee and some food, but come back. He was gone about 15 to 20 minutes. When he came back, we were there, and I'd still have control of the ship. When I said to the Captain, look, wave number 5, and that means the 5th wave away from us that was coming at us. And they looked, and Big Sven looked, and they looked in silence as this giant mountain of a wave came at us. It was now number 4, it was now number 3, and it was going to be on us within 15, 20 seconds. And Big Sven came to the wheel to take the wheel, and I shoved him away. For the first time, I showed my strength. I shoved him away, and I said, I've got this. And I took the ship through this giant wave. It was giant. It was frightening for the captain, for the mate, for the Big Sven. It wasn't frightening to me. I'd never seen a wave like it. It would have been frightening to anybody. But I knew, something inside me knew, the ship knew, the sea knew, the ship was pressing the rudder knew, and through the rudder into my hands, I knew I could do this. And I took the ship through this wave. For a moment or two, it was like being in a submarine. We were underwater. And the wave came down the deck towards the bridge. And I was sure it was going to smash through the windows, but it didn't. And the propeller was going wee, 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 as it came out of the water. And I calmed the ship down onto the other side. The mate came to me and hugged me. The captain came to me and patted me on the shoulder. Big Sven said, I'm sorry I hit you last night, or the night 2 months before. And from that moment, I became known through the Baltic grapevine of ships as one of the greatest wheelmen of all time. And I was 17 years old. Suddenly, my life changed by one wave.
How big was the wave, Tonz?
Oh, it was a mountain. It was about, 4-story house.
And you're like so I'm thinking in terms of like surfing, when you duck dive through a wave, you did that. But with
there's nothing. You when you're running, like in the barge, away, it's a totally different thing. But when you're actually going directly towards this wave, you've got a margin of error of 8 degrees, which is 4 degrees to the left, 4 degrees to the right, and you're in a hurricane. This one wave, it had taken away all the abuse. It had taken away everything. I'd never been responsible for anything. Now I can be responsible. I could take matters into my own hands. This one wave, which had come from nowhere, which was unprogrammed, changed my entire life. And I became, in the Baltic area, famous as the whaleman who had gone from taking the ship in circles in the North Sea to being the best through the Kiel Canal and to handling a giant wave in a hurricane. And other ships became interested in me. And that is why a certain ship, a certain captain, who had a problem steering his ship, called for me to join his ship. And I was promoted from junior ordinary seaman to senior ordinary seaman with much bigger wage. The captain of that ship, unbeknown to me at the time, was a pirate, a Swedish pirate. It took me several months to realize what was going on this ship. But once I had, and when the captain knew I had realized what kind of ship we were on, he took me under his wing and said, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know. And he did.